And let me introduce our second speaker, Dr. George Fraser, who is Assistant Professor of English and Associate Director of the Folklore Studies Program at George Mason University. For the past several years, she has been researching the relationship between mumming, violence, and the law in 19th-century Newfoundland. She has an article on the topic and a forthcoming chapter on contemporary responses to the Mercer murder case in Alison Marshall's edited volume on masking and mumming in North America. Meanwhile, she is completing a book tracing haggis role as a contested symbol of Scottishness, provisionally entitled Addressing the Haggis, Culture and Contestation in the Making of Scotland's National Dish. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. I'll just get my point up here.
So thank you very much for having me here today. And my paper today is called Some Fiends Disguised as Mummers, the Isaac Mercer Murder Case and the Politics of Sectarianism in 19th Century Newfoundland. In December 1860, a young fisherman named Isaac Mercer was fatally assaulted by 6 men disguised as Christmas mummers in the town of Bay Roberts, Newfoundland, in what remains one of the most notorious incidents in the island's history. Bay Roberts is right. I have a few more communities, and I really need there, but these are other communities where violence around the custom of Christmas mumming also took place around the same period. It marked the culmination of an escalating pattern of violence associated with Christmas mumming, prompting the Newfoundland legislature to enact a ban on the custom that remained in force for over a century. Despite a lengthy investigation leading to the indictment of 6 local men on charges of murder, in November 1861, a Supreme Court grand jury ruled that the evidence was insufficient to proceed to trial. Consequently, as far as is known, no one was ever convicted of causing Mercer's death. Local folk history surrounding the case has perpetuated the assumption that Mercer, an Anglican, was killed by 6 Roman Catholic mummers, an interpretation reinforced by the fact that mumming in Newfoundland has traditionally been associated primarily with Irish Catholic settlers and their descendants. However, evidence recently unearthed in parish records confirms that one of the first 3 men arrested in the case, James Henderson, was himself Anglican. While the other 2 chief suspects, brothers John and Stephen Dawson, were baptised Catholic, their mother had been raised as an Anglican and likely only converted to Catholicism on marriage. Moreover, evidence of an ongoing financial dispute between the Dawsons and the Mercers suggests a plausible motivating factor in the attack. I forgot to show you my other map. This is just a sketched map of the centre of Bay Roberts that was actually sketched by someone kind of as evidence during the investigation itself. So just at the top there is Wilcox's Lane. You may be able to see across the top. And just at the entrance to Wilcox's Lane is where Mercer and his 2 male relatives were fatally assaulted. He was fatally assaulted and they were not fatally assaulted, but just injured. Nonetheless, public responses to the case in the immediate aftermath of Mercer's death reflected a deep-seated sectarian division in Newfoundland society and politics that pitted supporters of the predominantly Roman Catholic liberals against those of the Protestant Conservative colonial establishment. Newfoundland was at this time a British colony and had achieved responsible government only in 1855. This new system of self-government had been introduced despite vehement opposition from the island's Protestant Conservative elites, who feared that it would further diminish their political control and strengthen the Catholic liberal ascendancy. By 1861, the year of the Mercer investigation, the Liberal government, led by Premier John Kent, was beset by internal conflicts and accusations of incompetence and corruption. At the end of February, the colony's governor, Sir Alexander Bannerman, took the questionably legal step of dismissing Kent's ministry from office and installing a minority Conservative administration in their place. The Liberals immediately passed a vote of no confidence, forcing Governor Bannerman to dissolve the House of Assembly and call a general election later that year. Several key players in this constitutional crisis were actively involved in the Mercer murder case, notably George Hogsett, Kent's Attorney General, who oversaw the initial inquiries into Mercer's death, and the Conservative leader Hugh Hoyles, who replaced Hogsett as Attorney General after Kent's administration was dismissed, and was also the chief prosecuting attorney in the Mercer case. So Mercer's death fueled a highly politicised sectarian discourse as Conservative politicians and their supporters in the virulently partisan Newfoundland press used the Mercer case to promote an anti-Catholic, anti-liberal agenda. I show how this pro-establishment agenda, accentuated by the constitutional crisis of 1861, shaped how contemporary commentators portrayed the circumstances of Mercer's death, the state of unrest at Bay Roberts in the wake of the incident, and the Kent administration's handling of the investigation. So first of all, responses to the killing of Mercer itself. In the investigation's initial weeks, a clear partisan division emerged between how Liberal and Conservative commentators presented the facts of the case and characterised Mercer's assailants. Much of the debate centred on whether Mercer's death was simply an accidental result of the sport of Christmas mumming, as the Catholic Liberal Newfoundlander newspaper suggested, or whether the custom provided a front enabling a deliberate assault. Whereas the Newfoundlander downplayed the gravity of the offence, maintaining that it was not of any deadly intent, pro-establishment commentators consistently emphasised the attackers' brutality, characterising them as savage murderers, atrocious criminals, fiends and scoundrels, whose actions were diabolical, monstrous, a fearful outrage. They drew a stark contrast between the assailants' characters and Mercer's own innocence, youth and respectability, with the Public Ledger, one of the most extreme Protestant Conservative newspapers, accusing the suspects of perpetrating a most cruel murder on an unoffending young man. The Telegraph described how Mercer and his companions were unmercifully pummelled by 6 men who, until that moment, assassin-like, lay concealed. Similarly, the Ledger insisted there can be little doubt that poor Mercer's destruction had been resolved upon, and most thoroughly and brutally was it accomplished. Unsurprisingly, Mercer's death lent urgency to the establishment's long-standing calls for increased legislative controls on mumming. While Liberal supporters tended to portray it as a relatively harmless amusement that occasionally got out of hand, pro-establishment commentators, like the Telegraph, condemned the way in which an unchecked parcel of blackguards amused themselves during the holidays. Newfoundland's Anglican bishop, Dr. Edward Field, decried the senseless, savage sports of the parties who infest our streets at Christmas. Governor Bannerman, meanwhile, described the practice as an abominable custom which must be put a stop to, urging the legislature to interfere to prevent these mummers from appearing in disguise with their faces covered, and thus giving some of them an opportunity of committing some heinous offence. No contemporary sources I consulted explicitly identified the Mercer case suspects as Catholics or directly attributed a sectarian motive. Nonetheless, Conservative responses to the case supported the pro-establishment agenda in 2 mutually reinforcing ways. On the one hand, Mercer's death re-energised calls for restrictions on a Catholic custom. On the other, mumming's association with Catholicism enabled Conservative commentators to portray Mercer's killing as motivated by anti-Protestant sectarianism. This last theme was explicitly developed in pro-establishment responses to the growing state of public unrest at Bay Roberts. in the first few weeks of 1861. Reports of the volatile state of public order at Bay Roberts in the aftermath of Mercer's death gave rise to a pro-establishment narrative in which the Catholic population of the time were depicted as obstructing the progress of the investigation and thereby preventing the discovery of the murderers. Protestant Conservative newspapers disseminated rumours that witnesses would not come forward for fear of retribution and that some had been threatened with violence if they testified. The Conservative press further alleged that individuals in positions of authority or status within the community who, quote, ought to be taking a lively interest in bringing the murderers forward, had failed to treat the matter seriously, dismissing it as January tricks associated with mumming. These reports contributed to the impression of a town descending into a state of general disorder. In a letter to the Telegraph, Bishop Field, the Anglican bishop, alleged that it would have been useless to have detained any suspects during the initial investigation into Mercer's death, as they would have been liberated by their comrades, likely resulting in further bloody violence. Vandals tore down copies of a government proclamation advertising a £100 reward for information about Mercer's killers, and that included they tore down posters posted outside the Protestant Board schoolhouse in the town. Everyone knew who was responsible, Bishop Field alleged, but no one stirs. Then, on the 31st of January, thieves broke into the schoolhouse itself, destroying papers and stealing Bibles, one of which was afterwards found floating in the harbour. The Public Ledger believed that the burglars were closely connected to those responsible for Mercer's death. Given these incidents and the lack of progress in the investigation, Bishop Field feared that if other means are not used to bring the offenders to justice, an opportunity will be taken by the young men in the harbour to avenge Mercer's death. When the first three suspects were apprehended in late February, Governor Bannerman wrote to the Colonial Office in London that the arrests had been carried out, quote, almost by stratagem, due to the state of unrest in the town. According to the Daily News, another Protestant paper, Conservative Protestant paper, scores of local residents stood ready to prevent the suspects being taken, though the police had averted unnecessary disturbance by transporting the three men to St John's. St John's is the island's capital, I can't remember if I mentioned that, by transporting them to St John's as quietly as possible. The paper suggested that the authorities would have used sufficient force to arrest the whole population of Bay Roberts if necessary. The Express, meanwhile, reported the threat of a number of Conception Bay rowdies that if these men are not admitted to bail, they will come over and liberate them. Pro-establishment commentators portrayed both the Mercer killing and the subsequent unrest at Bay Roberts as symptomatic of endemic rowdyism and lawlessness among the lower-class Catholic population of Conception Bay, where, according to the Ledger, the Lord of Misrule reigns paramount. Bishop Field's letter to the Telegraph used the Mercer case as one of several examples of, quote, the miserably disordered and degraded condition into which we have fallen. The Times newspaper called Mercer's death yet another and damning proof of the diabolical character of the rascals who roam at large in the bay, where neither life nor estate are secure. Their activities now included not only riots, bloodshed and battery, but murder too. Murdered is all in capitals there. The Ledger's framing of such lawlessness was the most overtly sectarianism of the pro-establishment papers. In an editorial prompted by an assault on a Protestant at Harbour Grace, a town just to the north of Bay Roberts, the paper described how the peaceful and respectable inhabitants are at the mercy of a lawless, ignorant and brutal populace, a raid of low, savage Roman Catholic blackguards, who thus assume the championship of their faith upon the Protestants of the town. At Bay Roberts, the Protestant schoolhouse break-in, in particular, reinforced the narrative that the town's public disorder was caused by a group of Roman Catholic blackguards conducting a campaign of violence and intimidation against the town's Protestants. The Ledger again commented in explicitly sectarian terms it claimed that the incident, quote, bears upon its face the instant conviction of the bigotry and rage of an enemy of Protestantism, blaming the perpetrator's dangerous religious teaching and laying the ultimate responsibility with the island's Catholic clergy. On the 2nd of March, rioting broke out at Bay Roberts, centring on the property of a local publican named Tobias Hackett, who was believed to be sheltering some fellow Catholics from, quote-unquote, punishment at the hands of some Protestants. And I've seen one account that these were actually suspects, further suspects in Mercer's murder, who he was sheltering, but I'm not sure that that's actually the case. I haven't found a contemporary source for that. Conflicting accounts of the affray were published in at least 3 different papers, disagreeing as to which side instigated the violence and by what means. The Catholic Liberal Newfoundlanders account made no mention of any party's religious affiliation and commented that Hackett's only provocation was to have sheltered 4 decent poor men who were being pursued by scoundrels. According to the Express's correspondent, however, the fugitives richly merited the punishment that their pursuers intended. The accounts in both the Ledger and Express insisted that Hackett and the rowdies he was sheltering were responsible for the disturbance and its consequences. The Ledger's correspondent wrote that the violence began when, quote, a Roman Catholic struck a Protestant and took shelter in a house belonging to Hackett, also a Roman Catholic. He added, if Hackett's house had not been surrounded, he would have sent word to his Roman Catholic friends, who, coming down in force, would have met the others in array. Liberal commentators fought a losing battle against the onslaught of pro-establishment commentary, demonising the blackguards responsible for Mercer's death and other foul schemes at Bay Roberts. The Newfoundlander, it was the most prominent Catholic Liberal paper, maintained that the killing and subsequent arrest provoked such outrage, provoked such outrage precisely because of their extreme rareness. Mercer's death was, quote, a solitary and exceptional instance of crime, having no possible link or reach beyond the small and comparatively obscure locality where it was perpetrated. Both the Newfoundlander and the Patriot, which was another Liberal paper, though a Protestant one, warned that by stirring up anti-Catholic sentiment among the Conception Bay Protestants, Bishop Field and his fellow pro-establishment commentators risked inciting further violence. Similarly, Premier John Kent maintained that the alleged lawlessness existed only in a few exceptional cases and accused the Conservative opposition and their petty faction of disingenuously representing our community as being in the direst state of disorder and rowdyism in order to stir up disaffection to the government. He charged Bishop Field in particular of, quote, conniving at the vilification on the part of the Protestant papers of everything Catholic, be it in religion or politics, to produce acrimonious retaliation on the other side and calmly wait for a political crisis. These words were to prove remarkably prescient. From the outset, this is my last section, opposition politicians and their supporters in the Protestant Conservative press criticised Kent's government for its allegedly incompetent handling of the Mercer investigation. When the case was discussed in the House of Assembly on the 21st of January, Hoyles castigated Kent's administration for failing to take prompt, active and energetic means to discover Mercer's assailants, and questioned whether, quote, there was any other country under the British Constitution that would allow a matter of such importance so inefficiently to be investigated and so suddenly to drop. With typical rhetorical flourish, the Ledger pronounced that the government's arrangements for the apprehension of the murderers were as wide of success as the onslaught of the murderers was determined and sure. The paper further accused the government of abandoning the investigation until pressured to reopen it by their political opponents. Bishop Field, meanwhile, accused the Kent administration of looking on, or rather looking off, while such crimes went unpunished. Much criticism of the government's role focused on Attorney General George Hogsett and whether he was culpable for the failure of the initial inquiries he oversaw at Bay Roberts. The Times newspaper considered it, quote, deplorable that the Attorney General failed in eliciting the slightest clue as to the fiend or fiends who committed the diabolical act, and the paper remained unconvinced by assurances that that functionary has done all he could possibly do in the matter. The Ledger argued that the plan adopted by Hogsett was an ill-advised one and rather subversive of, rather than assisting in, the discovery of Mercer's assailants. In response, Hogsett vehemently defended his course in acting as he did, and both he and Premier Kent accused the opposition of a fanatical zeal to secure convictions in the case, regardless of whether the suspects were guilty or innocent, and without the slightest shade of evidence. Some of the attacks on Attorney General Hogsett were stingingly personal. In private correspondence that Hogsett later read before the House of Assembly, Anglican Bishop Field wrote that, quote, his opinion and that of many others was that, quote, you were not competent to manage such an investigation under such circumstances, nor to advise in so difficult and delicate a case. Similarly, the opposition leader Hugh Hoyles, Conservative opposition leader, stated that while he respected Hogsett's zeal and energy, he believed that he was, quote, not the proper officer to conduct such an investigation. The government's appointment of a St John's magistrate, Charles Sims, to lead the renewed investigation in mid-February, probably in response to pressure from Conservative critics, effectively sidelined Hogsett, provoking a bitter response. As the political crisis escalated, Hogsett's exchanges with his opponents became increasingly vitriolic. Speaking in the House of Assembly on the 21st of February, a week before Governor Bannerman's dismissal of Kent's government, a Conservative politician, William Whiteway, alleged that Hogsett, quote, had been pitchforked into the office he held and for which he was wholly unfit and incompetent and which he disgraced. Whiteway accused Hogsett of, quote, shielding murderers, in reference to the Mercer case, to which the latter retorted by calling him a white-livered scoundrel. In a speech in the House on the 5th of March, seconding Kent's resolution of no confidence in the new Conservative administration, which the Governor had installed after dismissing the Liberal one, Hogsett accused Bannerman and Hoyles of conspiring to interfere in the Mercer investigation, despite his having strenuously resisted such an infringement on his position as Attorney General. Hogsett further claimed that it was because of his Catholicism that Bishop Field had pronounced him unfit to investigate the Mercer case. These remarks exemplify the entanglements among sectarian tensions, political rivalries, and personal animosities in the discourse surrounding the Mercer investigation in general and Hogsett's role in particular. Just as pro-establishment commentators contextualised the Mercer killing and subsequent unrest at Bay Roberts as part of a wider pattern of rowdyism among Conception Bay's Catholic population, so they used the government's failure to deal effectively with these matters as evidence of a general unfitness to govern. And indeed they went further and kind of used it as a way to kind of make the case that Newfoundland was not ready for responsible government. The Express, for example, complained that, quote, rowdyism is extending and our present government are powerless to put it down. It continued, quote, we unhesitatingly state our decided conviction that while they remain in power, the Liberal government remain in power, matters will go from bad to worse, and that their removal from office is absolutely necessary for the peace and well-being of the colony. Within a few weeks, these commentators got their way with the removal of Kent's government and the Conservative victory at the subsequent general election, ushering in several years of Conservative dominance in the Assembly. So just in conclusion then, the responses of pro-establishment commentators to the Mercer murder case furthered their political agenda in several respects. It enabled them to portray the Mercer killing and the subsequent unrest at Bay Roberts as evidence of a widespread campaign of violence and intimidation by Roman Catholic rowdies against the Protestant inhabitants of Conception Bay. By cementing the association of mumming with the area's Irish Catholic populace, it lent weight to these commentators' long-standing calls for tighter restrictions on the custom. Moreover, it provided them with ammunition to attack John Kent's beleaguered Liberal government, both for its alleged mishandling of the Mercer investigation and its failure to maintain law and order in the colony more generally. Christmas mumming, far from being a pleasant seasonal diversion, became the touchstone for personal animosities, sectarian tensions and political rivalries during one of the most turbulent years in Newfoundland's history. Thank you.